Ukraine may have discovered something far more dangerous to the Kremlin than another burning refinery. Not a tank factory, not an ammunition depot, not even a military airfield, a shopping warehouse. That sounds ridiculous until you understand what is actually happening. Because when a Wildberries distribution center burns, Ukraine is not simply destroying a building full of shoes, electronics, household goods, spare parts, and packages waiting to be delivered. It is attacking the machinery that allows millions of Russians to pretend the war is still somewhere else. And that changes everything. For years, the Kremlin has tried to maintain a strange psychological bargain with the Russian public. The military fights. The government mobilizes resources. Sanctions come and go. Factories shift toward wartime production. But ordinary life is supposed to continue. You order what you want. You go to work. You receive your packages. You complain about prices. You watch television. And the war remains distant enough that it becomes background noise. Ukraine now appears determined to destroy that illusion, one warehouse at a time. The latest example came in Voronezh, where a huge Wildberries logistics hub that had reportedly opened only in late 2025 became the scene of a massive fire after a Ukrainian drone attack. The facility covered roughly 152,900 square meters and had capacity for as many as 90 million items, making it an important node in the company's distribution network. Think about that scale. 90 million items. Thousands of sellers. Huge volumes of daily orders. Trucks arriving. Trucks departing. Sorting systems running constantly. Packages moving through an enormous automated network designed around one assumption: tomorrow will look roughly like today. Then drones appear. Suddenly that assumption becomes worthless. According to the materials surrounding the strike, fire spread across tens of thousands of square meters before firefighters managed to contain the blaze. And that is where the real damage begins. Because warehouses are not valuable merely because of the concrete walls surrounding them. Their value comes from predictability. A merchant sends products there because he expects them to remain safe. A customer orders something because she expects it to arrive. A delivery company assigns vehicles because it expects packages to be ready. A bank provides financing because it expects the business to keep operating. An insurer calculates risk because it assumes catastrophic destruction is unusual. Destroy those assumptions, and you do not just damage a warehouse. You damage confidence. That may be exactly what Ukraine is trying to accomplish. Russia can replace steel beams. It can replace roofing. It can pour more concrete. But replacing trust is much harder. Imagine being a small Wildberries seller. You manufacture household products, clothing, phone accessories, cosmetics, tools, or children's goods. Maybe you are not a billionaire. Maybe you operate on thin margins. You borrow money to buy inventory. You ship thousands of units to a fulfillment center. You expect those units to sell gradually over several weeks. Then the warehouse burns. Your inventory disappears. You still owe suppliers. You still owe the bank. You still have salaries. You still have rent. And now you are trying to determine who is going to pay you back. That question could become far more damaging to Wildberries than any individual drone. Because once thousands of sellers begin asking the same question, the attack spreads far beyond the original blast radius. No drone has to reach their offices. Fear does it instead. And Ukraine's campaign against Wildberries does not appear to be a single isolated event. The competitor material describes strikes against facilities in multiple Russian regions, including Moscow, Vladimir, Ryazan, Samara, Penza, Tambov, Stavropol, Krasnodar, St. Petersburg, and Voronezh. That geography matters. Ukraine is not trying to prove that one building can burn. It is trying to prove that the network cannot reliably protect itself. Those are two very different messages. If a warehouse burns once, management calls it an emergency. If warehouses begin burning across multiple regions, management starts calling it a structural risk. Insurance companies notice. Investors notice. Vendors notice. Workers notice. And eventually customers notice. That is the nightmare. Because Wildberries is not some obscure industrial supplier hidden behind a fence outside Moscow. It is woven into everyday Russian life. That makes attacking it psychologically different from attacking an oil refinery. Most Russians never visit a refinery. They do not order from a refinery. They do not track an aviation fuel shipment on their phone. They do not receive a notification saying, "Your diesel processing unit will arrive tomorrow." A logistics marketplace is different. People interact with it constantly. Someone orders a winter coat. Someone needs replacement parts. Someone buys medication-related products. Someone orders a laptop charger. Someone runs a small business through the platform. When that system becomes unreliable, the war stops being an abstract geopolitical event. Now the war has delayed your package. Now the war has destroyed your inventory. Now the war has increased delivery prices. Now the war may have eliminated your income. That is a radically different form of pressure. And it may explain why warehouses have suddenly become such attractive targets. Ukraine has spent years attacking Russia's military logistics and energy infrastructure. Fuel matters, railways matter, air bases matter, ports matter. But every major military target Russia protects with additional air defenses creates another problem. There are only so many air defense systems. Russia is enormous. Its territory stretches across 11 time zones. Its industrial network includes refineries, airports, military factories, substations, ports, rail junctions, command centers, and logistics facilities. Protecting everything is impossible. So Moscow has to make choices. Put a sophisticated air defense battery around a refinery, and maybe something else remains exposed. Protect an airbase, and another logistics hub becomes vulnerable. Move systems toward Moscow, and regions farther away become easier to penetrate. Ukraine does not necessarily have to destroy every protected target. It merely has to force Russia to defend more targets than Russia can comfortably defend. Wildberries helps create that problem beautifully. Because warehouses are enormous, you cannot hide them. They are visible from satellites. Their locations are publicly known. Trucks constantly move in and out. They require huge roofs, huge yards, and huge road connections. They are almost the opposite of a hardened military bunker. And once a fire begins inside a building containing mountains of packaged goods, plastics, cardboard, textiles, and consumer products, the building itself can become part of the problem. That changes the economics of drone warfare. A drone does not need to carry enough explosives to physically demolish 150,000 square meters of concrete. It only needs to start a process that becomes difficult to control. Fire does the rest. And that creates a brutal cost exchange. Ukraine launches relatively inexpensive long-range drones. Russia then has to protect facilities worth tens or hundreds of millions of dollars. If interception succeeds, Russia spends air defense ammunition. If interception fails, the warehouse may burn. Either way, somebody pays. And lately, Moscow appears to be paying more often. The Voronezh incident became even more embarrassing because Russian officials reportedly blamed falling drone debris for the fires. We have heard variations of that explanation repeatedly. A drone was intercepted. Fragments fell. Something caught fire. Technically, that scenario can happen. But after enough strategically important buildings keep catching fire exactly where incoming drones were heading, the argument starts becoming politically less useful. Russian authorities have a difficult communication problem. Admit Ukraine is successfully striking deep inside Russia, and you highlight vulnerability. Claim everything was intercepted and you create another question, then why is everything burning? That contradiction is becoming harder to hide. And Wildberries is particularly awkward because customers can see the consequences. They do not need classified satellite photographs. They can see smoke. They can see delivery disruptions. They can see seller complaints. They can see evacuation footage. They can see products disappearing. The information war becomes much harder when the evidence is sitting inside your shopping application. But there is another layer to this, and this may be the biggest problem of all. Ukraine does not necessarily need Wildberries to collapse. It may only need the Russian government to believe Wildberries cannot be allowed to collapse. That difference is crucial. Because once a company becomes politically indispensable, every financial problem becomes the Kremlin's problem. Suppose warehouse losses continue. Suppose sellers begin demanding compensation. Suppose delivery times increase. Suppose insurance costs explode. Suppose merchants begin leaving. Suppose revenue weakens. Suppose Wildberries eventually needs government support. Where does that money come from? The Russian state. And where does the Russian state get money? The same pool of resources being used for military spending, regional budgets, infrastructure, subsidies, pensions, and economic support. Ukraine would effectively be forcing Moscow to spend money rebuilding shopping infrastructure that Russia never expected to become part of the battlefield. That is economic warfare through obligation. You do not merely destroy something. You force your enemy to pay to save it. Then you threaten it again. That is what makes repeated strikes so important. If Russia rebuilds one warehouse and the campaign ends, the damage is manageable. If Russia rebuilds while wondering whether another drone will return 6 weeks later, the entire investment calculation changes. Do you reconstruct the same giant facility? Do you divide inventory across smaller sites? Do you install expensive fire suppression? Do you hire more security? Do you demand air defenses? Do you move operations farther east? Every option costs money. And some create new inefficiencies. A giant centralized warehouse is efficient because enormous volumes can be processed in one place. Break that facility into smaller sites and you reduce vulnerability, but you may also increase staffing, transportation, technology, and management costs. Ukraine does not need to design Wildberries' new logistics network. It just needs to make the old one feel unsafe. Then, Russia redesigns it for them, at its own expense. Now add the vendors. This is where things could become explosive economically. The supplied material says Wildberries changed parts of its merchant agreement before the major wave of attacks, limiting responsibility for goods destroyed by missile or drone strikes. That might protect the company's balance sheet in the short term. But imagine what it does to seller psychology. If your inventory burns and the marketplace says the loss belongs to you, what do you do with your next shipment? Send another 10,000 units? Or send 2,000? Do you keep using Wildberries exclusively? Or do you diversify? Do you raise prices to cover the new risk? Do you buy insurance? Do you leave e-commerce entirely? Multiply those decisions across thousands of merchants. This is how supply chains slowly fracture. Not necessarily with one spectacular collapse, but through thousands of rational people independently deciding to take less risk. And suddenly the marketplace has fewer products, less inventory, higher prices, longer delivery times, angrier merchants, lower customer confidence. That is a vicious cycle. The platform becomes weaker because sellers distrust it. Sellers distrust it because it becomes weaker. Customers notice problems and order less. Lower sales reduce available cash. Cash problems create slower payments. Slower payments make merchants even more nervous. At that point, Ukraine does not have to destroy every warehouse. The fear of the next strike starts doing work that drones cannot. That may be the deeper strategy. Weaponize uncertainty. Russia understands physical destruction. Its government can calculate how many square meters were damaged. It can estimate repair costs. It can dispatch construction crews. What is harder to calculate is the cost of everybody believing the next warehouse could be next. And Ukraine appears to be spreading exactly that belief. Voronezh today, another region tomorrow. A logistics hub after that. Maybe a refinery on the same night. Maybe an air defense site. Maybe a rail junction. The pattern forces Russian planners to constantly ask the same question: what are they coming for next? And every wrong answer leaves something exposed. Ukraine has increasingly relied on this type of pressure because it cannot simply overpower Russia through traditional industrial scale. Russia has more territory, more population, more conventional depth. So Ukraine has to attack systems. Find the point where a relatively small strike produces disproportionately large consequences. A giant retail warehouse is almost a perfect example. One drone reaches one building, but thousands of merchants may feel the result. Tens of thousands of customers may notice disruption. Hundreds of employees may be displaced. Dozens of trucking routes may change. Insurance risk may rise nationally. Government officials may face questions. Air defense planners may be forced to reallocate resources. One target. Many consequences. That is asymmetric warfare. And there is an uncomfortable question Moscow now has to answer. What exactly counts as strategic infrastructure anymore? A warehouse storing military equipment obviously matters. But what about a warehouse primarily handling consumer goods? Ukraine argues wild berries has been connected to supplies useful to Russian soldiers and therefore contributes to the broader war economy. Russia rejects the idea that this makes its retail network a legitimate target. That debate will continue. But strategically, Ukraine seems interested in something larger than the contents of any individual package. Wild berries symbolizes normality. Destroying that normality creates political pressure. This is where the campaign becomes risky for Ukraine as well. Economic pain does not automatically produce opposition to the government. Sometimes external attacks make populations rally around their leadership. A Russian seller who loses everything might blame Putin for the war. Or he might blame Ukraine for destroying his livelihood. There is no guarantee. Pressure can produce anger in unpredictable directions. That is why this campaign should not be misunderstood as some automatic formula for political collapse. It is a gamble. Ukraine appears to be betting that the longer ordinary Russians personally experience the consequences of the conflict, the harder it becomes for the Kremlin to insulate society from the cost. Russia is betting the opposite, that its population will adapt, that the government can absorb the losses, that businesses will stay loyal, that warehouses can be rebuilt, that air defenses can improve, that Ukraine will eventually run out of drones, funding, launch sites, or political support. One side is betting on disruption, the other is betting on endurance. And right now, wild berries is becoming one of the strangest places where those two strategies collide. Not inside a trench, not over a battlefield, inside Russia's online shopping network. That may sound absurd. But modern wars are not fought only by soldiers. They are fought by banking systems, fuel networks, factories, shipping companies, data centers, railways, power grids, telecommunications, and logistics, especially logistics. An army without logistics stops moving, but so does an economy, and a government fighting a long war needs both. That is why the wider Ukrainian strike campaign matters. The same waves that threaten warehouses are also forcing Russia to think about refineries, energy facilities, ports, and air defense systems. Every successful penetration proves something. Russia's rear is no longer automatically safe just because it is hundreds or even more than 1,000 kilometers from the front. Distance used to be protection. Long-range drones are gradually turning distance into a calculation. And calculations can be defeated. This is probably the biggest strategic transformation behind the burning warehouses. Ukraine is attempting to erase the idea of a safe rear area. If factories near Moscow can be threatened, if refineries deep inside Russia can be threatened, if logistics centers in multiple regions can be threatened, then Russia has to defend an almost impossible map. Ukraine only has to find gaps in it. The Kremlin therefore faces three bad choices: spread air defenses everywhere and weaken protection around military priorities. Concentrate defenses around military assets and accept damage to economic targets. Or dramatically increase air defense production and spending, adding yet another massive burden to the war economy. None of those choices is attractive. And every new warehouse added to the target list makes the problem slightly worse. That is why Voronezh is more important than one fire. It is another data point, another message, another location where Russian authorities, businesses, and citizens are being reminded that the battlefield is expanding. And if Ukraine can sustain this campaign, the real question will not be how many wild berries warehouses burn. The real question will be when the company starts changing the way it operates, because it expects them to burn. That is the moment physical damage becomes systemic damage. Once businesses plan around attacks rather than treating them as rare emergencies, Ukraine has already achieved something important. It has changed Russian economic behavior. And changing behavior is often more powerful than destroying buildings. Because buildings can be rebuilt. Behavior spreads. Fear spreads. Cost spreads. Distrust spreads. And suddenly one warehouse fire in Voronezh is connected to a merchant wondering whether to ship new inventory in Samara, a truck operator renegotiating rates in Moscow, an insurer rewriting risk calculations in St. Petersburg, a government official discussing another subsidy, an air defense commander deciding which facility gets protection tonight. That is the chain reaction Ukraine appears to be trying to create, not one spectacular knockout blow. 1,000 smaller problems arriving faster than Russia can comfortably solve them. Wild berries may survive. Russia's e-commerce system may adapt. The Kremlin may pour money into reconstruction and defense. But none of that changes the central point. Ukraine has identified a target that sits at the intersection of economics, logistics, psychology, and politics. That makes it unusually valuable. Because when an oil refinery burns, Moscow loses fuel capacity. When a wild berries warehouse burns, Moscow may lose something more difficult to replace: the belief among ordinary Russians that the war will never arrive at their door. And once that belief is gone, there is no air defense system in the world that can shoot it back into existence. Voronezh was not simply another warehouse fire. It was another warning. Russia's rear is becoming part of the battlefield. Its consumer economy is becoming part of the pressure campaign. And Ukraine appears determined to keep asking the same question until Moscow has an answer: how many places can Russia protect at the same time? Because if the answer is not all of them, Ukraine only needs to find the one place Russia forgot tonight.